I never thought life would bring me here, standing in the dimly lit hallway of our apartment, feeling the weight of my existence pressing down on me in ways I could barely articulate. I am 39 years old, a woman who has dedicated the past 2 decades to a life that, in many ways, does not feel like my own anymore. By day, I work in an Asian massage salon. A job that I chose not just for the skill, but for the love I have always carried for the traditions, the culture, the healing touch of ancient techniques that fascinated me since I was young. It's more than a job. It's an art, a practice that requires patience, intuition, and an understanding of the human body that many dismiss. But my husband, he doesn't see it that way. To him, I am little more than a glorified maid. I see it in his eyes, in the way he speaks to me, in the judgment that lingers in his silence more than in his words. We've been together for so long, but I can barely remember the last time I felt like he looked at me as a woman, as someone worthy of admiration, of love. Our conversations have dwindled into necessity, our presence in each other's lives feeling more like a lingering obligation than a partnership. I feel devalued, unseen. Then there's my son, 18 years old, on the cusp of becoming a man, yet still holding on to pieces of the boy I raised. The one person who still sees me beyond my role, beyond my duties. He is the only one who ever asks me how I'm doing, who notices when I'm exhausted, when I've spent too many hours standing, kneading away the tension in someone else's muscles while carrying my own on my shoulders. Tonight, the weight of it all presses against me more than usual. The air in the apartment is thick with silence. My husband having retreated to his office, probably watching something on his phone with that same vacant expression he always wears around me. I change into something comfortable, my muscles aching from a long shift, and move toward the kitchen only to find my son there already making tea. My tea. "You're home late," he says, his voice steady but warm, a contrast to the cold indifference I have grown accustomed to in my marriage. I nod, slipping into the chair across from him as he pushes a steaming mug toward me. "It was busy." He watches me for a moment as if reading something in my face that I can't hide. "You look tired." I exhale, wrapping my fingers around the ceramic warmth of the mug. "I am." And for a while we sit there in the quiet, the space between us filled with something unspoken, something that has always existed but has grown stronger over the past year. The understanding that, in this house, we are the only two who truly see each other. The tea is warm in my hands, the silence between us familiar yet heavy with something unspoken. Jake sits across from me, watching me in that way he has, calm, observant, as if he can see past my tired smile and into the exhaustion that lingers beneath my skin. "You should rest more," he says, his voice steady but filled with quiet concern. I smile softly, taking a slow sip of tea. "You sound like an old man." He chuckles, shaking his head. "Maybe I just notice things more than other people do. And that's the truth of it." He notices. It's been this way for a while now. This shift in our relationship, this closeness that feels deeper than just a mother and son sharing a home. He takes care of me in a way that no one else does. He makes sure I eat when I come home too late. He massages my shoulders when he sees me wincing from a long shift, and he listens. Really listens. When I talk about my work, my interests, the things that make me feel alive outside of these walls. He's not a boy anymore. There's a quiet confidence in the way he moves now, in the way he speaks, in the way he carries himself. He doesn't hesitate when he reaches for something, doesn't second-guess his words the way he did when he was younger. And I see it more and more each day, the man he's becoming. A man who pays attention. A man who looks at me like I am more than just a mother who comes home tired every night. It was a Thursday evening, the air outside thick with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. The lights in the massage salon were dim, the atmosphere calm, the scent of essential oils lingering in the air. I was waiting for my last client of the night, rubbing my sore wrists absent-mindedly, already dreaming about sinking into a warm bath when I got home. It had been a long shift and I was looking forward to finishing up. When the door opened, I turned, expecting to see a stranger. Instead, Jake stood there. For a moment, I just stared at him, my mind struggling to catch up with the sight of him standing in the soft glow of the salon lights. He was wearing a dark jacket over a simple t-shirt, his hair slightly tousled from the wind outside, his expression unreadable. "Jake." I frowned, confused. "What are you doing here?" He held up his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. I had an appointment. I blinked. What? I signed up under a different name. His voice was calm, teasing almost, but there was something else beneath the amusement in his eyes. Something quiet and knowing. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how small the space felt. Why? He shrugged, stepping further into the room, his presence filling the space effortlessly. I wanted to see what you do. You already know what I do. Not like this, he said, watching me carefully. Not the way other people see you. My heart did a strange little flip, but I ignored it, pushing past the unexpected weight of his words. I let out a slow breath, schooling my features into something neutral. Jake, this is a professional space. I know, he said, his voice steady. That's why I made an appointment. He was challenging me, in a way, not in a disrespectful way, but in the way he always did when he wanted to understand something, when he wanted to push a boundary just enough to see what lay beyond it. I hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the schedule on my desk, as if looking at his false name would change the reality of the situation. He had signed up. He had followed the rules. And technically I had no reason to refuse him. With a quiet exhale, I nodded toward the massage table. All right. Lie down. He did as I said, moving with an ease that made my stomach twist. He pulled off his jacket, then his shirt, and my breath caught for a moment, not because I hadn't seen him shirtless before, but because it felt different now here in this space that wasn't home. He lay on his stomach, resting his head on his folded arms, watching me as I moved around the table, my hands already reaching for the bottle of oil on the counter. I tried to focus, tried to remind myself that this was no different from any other client. But as I pressed my hands against his back, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my fingers, something shifted in the air between us. Relax, I murmured, my voice softer than usual. He let out a slow breath, his body easing under my touch. And as I worked, kneading the tension from his muscles, I couldn't ignore the way he felt beneath my hands. The solidness of him, the way his breathing slowed, the way his body trusted mine. It wasn't just the physical closeness. It was the knowing. The quiet understanding that neither of us spoke aloud. That in this moment, in this space, there was no one else in the world but us. I didn't know how long I worked, how much time passed before I finally stepped back, my hands lingering at his shoulder blades for just a second too long before I pulled away. He stayed still for a moment before turning his head to look at me, his eyes unreadable. That was nice, he said simply. My throat felt tight. Good. He sat up slowly, reaching for his shirt but not putting it on right away, his gaze never leaving mine. I get it now, he murmured. I swallowed. Get what? His lips curved into something soft, something knowing. How other people see you. I felt my pulse in my throat, an unfamiliar heat creeping up my spine. And how do they see me? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter when he finally spoke. Like you're worth something. The words hit harder than I expected. Like you're worth something. Like you're more than just a tired woman coming home to a husband who doesn't see you. Like you're more than just a mother who carries too much weight on her shoulders. I swallowed, forcing myself to hold his gaze. I should clean up. He nodded, but he didn't move right away. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing over mine for just a second before pulling away. I'll wait for you, he said. And then he stood, pulling his shirt over his head, moving toward the door with that same quiet confidence. I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but I knew one thing for certain. Everything had changed. I stood in the dimly lit room long after Jake had left, my fingers trembling slightly as I put away the massage oils, folded the towels and tried to focus on something, anything, other than the way his voice still echoed in my mind. Like you're worth something. It shouldn't have made my chest feel so tight. It shouldn't have made me want to close my eyes and hold on to the words like they were a lifeline. But it did. Because when was the last time someone had said something like that to me? When was the last time I had felt like more than just a woman moving through the motions of a life that had long stopped feeling like my own? I took a deep breath, pressing my hands against the counter, willing myself to push the thoughts away. It was just Jake. My son. He was just being kind. Just being. The sound of the door clicking shut pulled me from my thoughts. I turned, expecting to see another late client or a coworker closing up for the night. But it was him. Jake stood in the hallway, leaning casually against the wall, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. Something steady, something sure. "Come on," he said simply. I blinked, confused. "Come on where?" "We're not going home," he said, pushing off the wall. "Not yet." I hesitated. "Jake, it's late." "I know." His voice was calm but firm. "But you need to rest." I let out a soft, tired laugh. "I'll rest when I get home." He shook his head. "No, you won't." I frowned. "Jake." He took a step closer, and for some reason I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. "You'll go home and he'll barely look at you. You'll clean up, maybe sit in the living room for a while, and then you'll go to bed feeling just as tired as you did when you left here." His voice was steady, quiet, but there was something behind it. Something fierce, something unyielding. "That's not rest, Mom. That's just surviving." My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't wrong, and the fact that he saw it so clearly, felt it so deeply, made my heart ache in a way I wasn't prepared for. I swallowed. "Jake, your father will be worried." "No, he won't." His words were sharp, final. "You and I both know he won't even notice how late you are." I looked away, my fingers tightening around the strap of my purse. "Don't think about him," Jake said, his voice softer now. "He doesn't deserve you." I froze. "He doesn't deserve you." The words settled between us, heavy and unspoken, the truth of them lingering in the air like something neither of us could take back. I looked up at him, then really looked at him. He wasn't the boy I had raised anymore. He was a man who saw me in ways no one else did, who paid attention to the way my shoulders slumped when I came home, the way my laughter had become rare and fleeting, the way I had learned to live in the shadows of my own life. "Please," he said, quieter now. "Just tonight." I should have said no. I should have done the responsible thing, the expected thing. But I didn't. I nodded. And Jake smiled. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't need to. Jake drove with an ease that made it clear he had planned this, that he had thought about it long before he had stepped into my salon tonight. The streets blurred past in streaks of gold and silver, the hum of the city alive but distant. I leaned back against the seat, my body finally giving in to the exhaustion I had been holding at bay all day. I didn't realize I had closed my eyes until I felt the car slow to a stop. I blinked, looking out the window, my breath catching slightly. A hotel. Not a grand, expensive one, but something quiet, peaceful. A place tucked away from the world, where the lights were warm and the night felt softer somehow. I turned to Jake, my brows furrowing. "Jake. Just trust me," he said. And I did. I don't know why, but I did. The check-in was quick, smooth, and before I knew it, I was stepping into a room that smelled of fresh linens and quiet serenity. The space was simple but beautiful. Soft lighting, a large bed, a couch by the window overlooking the city. Jake set my bag down near the door, then turned to me. "You should take a bath." I let out a breathy laugh. "Are you ordering me to?" "Yeah," he said, smiling. "I am." I shook my head, but I couldn't help the small, genuine smile that tugged at my lips. A bath did sound nice. So I went into the bathroom, turning on the water, watching as steam curled into the air. And for the first time in what felt like years, I let myself breathe. I sank into the warm water, closing my eyes, feeling the tension slip from my muscles, the exhaustion melting into something softer, something lighter. I didn't know how long I stayed there, but when I finally emerged, wrapped in a robe, my hair damp and loose, Jake was sitting by the window looking out at the city. He turned when he heard me, his gaze sweeping over me for a moment before he smiled. "Feel better?" I nodded. "Yeah. Good." I hesitated for a moment before walking over to where he sat. He didn't move as I lowered myself onto the couch beside him, our shoulders almost touching. We sat in silence for a while, the city stretching out beneath us, the hum of life moving on without us. And for once I didn't feel guilty for pausing. I glanced at Jake, watching as the soft glow of the city lights played across his face. "You didn't have to do this," I murmured. He turned to me then, his expression unreadable. Yes, I did. Something about the certainty in his voice made my breath hitch. As I believed him. And for the first time in years I felt like someone had chosen me. The night stretched on, filled with quiet conversations, shared glances, and something unspoken lingering in the space between us. Jake had always been my son. But tonight he felt like something more. Not in a way that was wrong. But in a way that made me realize. He was the only person in this world who had ever truly seen me. And maybe, just maybe, I had been waiting to be seen all along. The soft hum of the city outside felt distant as I sat on the couch, my robe pulled snug around me, my damp hair clinging to my skin. The hotel room was quiet except for the occasional shifting of fabric as Jake adjusted his posture beside me, his broad shoulders relaxed but his eyes sharp, watchful. The moments stretched between us, delicate and unspoken, like a thin thread that neither of us dared to pull too hard for fear of unraveling something we couldn't put back together. I should have been thinking about my husband, about how I would explain coming home late, about how he would barely notice either way. But I wasn't. I was thinking about Jake. About the way he had looked at me in the salon. About the way he had told me I was worth something. About how for the first time in a long time I felt like someone had seen me, not just as a wife, not just as a mother, but as me. And then his voice, low and careful, broke the silence. I was thinking. I turned to him, waiting. His eyes flickered to mine, his lips pressed together like he was debating something. I want to give you a massage. I blinked. What? The same one you gave me, he clarified, his voice steady, but I could see the hint of hesitation in his expression. I know how much you love what you do. And I see how tired you are, how much you give to everyone else. He paused, his gaze steady. But no one ever gives back to you. Except me. I felt my stomach twist. Guess he was right. Guess he was the only one. I looked down at my hands, at the way my fingers trembled slightly against my lap, at the ghost of his touch still lingering in my mind from earlier in the salon. You don't have to do that, I murmured. I know. I swallowed. Why are you interested in this all of a sudden? His answer came without hesitation. Because you are. My breath caught. Of course. Jake had always been like this, attentive in a way that sometimes scared me. He remembered things no one else did, noticed the small details that I had long stopped expecting anyone to see. He saw me. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. Jake. I just want to take care of you, he said softly. Like you take care of everyone else. My heart twisted, the weight of his words settling into my chest. When was the last time someone had said something like that to me? When was the last time I had let myself be taken care of? I hesitated for a long moment, my pulse thrumming beneath my skin, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't know how to process. And then, I nodded. Jake stood without a word, moving toward the neatly made bed. He pulled back the blanket, adjusting the pillows with practiced ease, his movements deliberate, confident. Lie down, he said gently. I hesitated, standing slowly, my robe shifting around me as I moved toward the bed. I sat at the edge for a moment, my fingers pressing into the soft fabric of the mattress, my breath unsteady. Then with a quiet exhale I lay down on my stomach, turning my head to the side, my cheek pressed against the pillow. The bed dipped slightly as Jake kneeled beside me, his presence warm, steady. Just relax, he murmured. Easier said than done. I heard the quiet rustling of fabric, the faint sound of a bottle being opened, and then his hands. Warm, careful, pressing gently against my shoulders. I tensed instinctively, my breath hitching, but Jake was patient, his movements slow, deliberate. You always talk about everyone else, he said quietly. But no one ever talks about you. My stomach twisted. He was right. I spent my days listening to people, tending to them, easing their aches and pains, offering comfort where I could. I listened to my husband's complaints about work. I listened to coworkers vent about their lives. I listened to clients tell me their stories as I worked the tension from their bodies. But no one ever asked about me. Except Jake. His thumbs pressed into a knot just below my shoulder blade, working the tension loose, and I exhaled shakily, my eyes fluttering shut. Does that feel good? He asked, his voice lower now, softer. I swallowed, nodding against the pillow. He continued, his hands moving lower, his palms pressing into my back with the same patience and care that I had used on him earlier. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself melt into someone else's touch. Jake took his time, his fingers tracing slow, careful lines along my spine, easing the weight I had carried for so long. The weight of my marriage. The weight of loneliness. The weight of never feeling like I belonged to myself anymore. And in the quiet safety of that hotel room with the city lights casting shadows against the walls, I felt something shift inside me. Something I couldn't name. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to name. Because this was Jake. And he was the only one who had ever made me feel this way. I didn't know how much time passed. I only knew the warmth of his hands, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way the tension in my body slowly faded beneath his touch. When he finally stopped, I felt strangely lighter, as if he had pulled something from me that I hadn't even realized I was holding on to. He pulled the blanket over me gently like I was something fragile, something breakable. And then he whispered, "You deserve more than the life you've been given." I felt my throat tighten, my fingers curling into the sheets. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because he was right. And that terrified me. I don't know how long I lay there, wrapped in warmth, my mind a quiet storm of emotions I couldn't untangle. I heard Jake move away from the bed, heard the soft rustle of fabric as he sat back down in the chair by the window. But I didn't open my eyes. Because I knew if I did, if I looked at him now, I wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. That nothing had changed. That I hadn't crossed a line in my heart I could never uncross. That the only person in this world who truly saw me was the one person I wasn't supposed to see back. Jake had always been attentive, always looking out for me in ways I had long stopped expecting from anyone. But tonight something had changed. The way he had taken care of me, the way he had insisted I deserved rest, the way his hands had moved over my skin with such quiet reverence. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what to do with him. I exhaled slowly, shifting beneath the blanket he had draped over me, my body sinking deeper into the soft mattress. And then I heard him move. The rustling of fabric. The quiet creak of the chair by the window. And then his voice. Low, steady. Close. "Good night, Mom." I swallowed, my throat tight, my heart knocking against my ribs. And then before I could respond, before I could think, before I could stop him, his lips pressed against my cheek. Soft. Warm. Chill. I felt my breath hitch, my fingers curling into the sheets, my body frozen beneath the weight of that single delicate moment. He pulled away slowly, his breath lingering for just a second longer than it should have, and when I finally opened my eyes, he was already moving toward the door. I turned my head, watching as he reached for the light switch, his movements calm, unhurried. He didn't look back, didn't say anything else. He just flicked off the light. And then the door closed softly behind him, leaving me alone, leaving me in the dark, leaving me with nothing but the memory of his touch, and the unbearable, undeniable truth that something between us had shifted, irrevocably,